Inside your spotlight this morning, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, Minister of National Security, formerly Minister of Public Utilities. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Rockers, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
How are you doing this morning?
Well, it's a bit hectic on the election campaign.
Of course.
I could finish a spot meeting in Sherwood Park area, that's in East Trinidad, late yesterday evening after a long walk. And that has been the story almost every single day. So
Yeah.
it's quite a lot.
Carnival for all, yeah. More or less. More or less, you know what I mean? The amount of energy and the excitement and the constant going, it's similar energy.
Yeah, you feel
except it's a different intention.
You feel like a soca artist.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, Mr. Soca Artist, let me get into some of the people's business, the national conversation. Of course, you have held the post of Minister of Public Utilities for a greater part of the last
4 years.
4 years, right?
Yes.
Let me ask, in that capacity, before we move on to the national security conversation, what are some of the things that you are proudest of achieving under that ministry?
We had a program, the Ministry of National Security has a program that is named the Community Water Improvement Program, or CWIP. And under that program, we were able to visit a number of communities where we introduced pipe-borne water supply for the very first time to unserved and underserved communities. We targeted those communities because we recognized that whilst, yes, you needed improvements across the board, you had citizens still living in communities, sometimes squatting communities that were constructed outside of the water distribution grid, rural communities and what have you. So we came up with a list of projects targeting those communities, and I can tell you that I have visited as Minister of Public Utilities these people, and would have spoken to them, engaged them in conversations, and the transformation that you would have seen in their lives when they received water for the very first time or an improved level of service. I think that program needs to be expanded, because you will always have communities that are outside of your distribution grid, your utility grid, because of planning issues and what have you. So especially in rural communities, oftentimes people who live in rural communities do not feel as though that they are part of national development, that development is more targeted towards more the urban centers and what have you. So under CWIP, we targeted those rural communities, and I can tell you areas like in Tabaquite, in Matura, in Toko Sangre Grande, Granville, and Cedros, and just to name a few. There's a beautiful community that is called Coruscant in Tabaquite, and they clamored for water for over 50 years, and we were able to introduce pipe-borne water supply for a small community comprising 300 to 400 people. And there are so many other communities in Sangre Grande. I was talking in a political meeting recently in Kumana, and I would have met some of the people who live like in Church Street in Matura, in St. Albans, in Pine Avenue, Barbande, some of those squatting communities or communities that have been been constructed outside of your planning arrangement.
So this is my thing. My concern with it is that while I can applaud people getting water on pipe-borne water supply for certain,
yes,
I have to wonder though, are we encouraging people to do the not so right thing in terms of if you're already, I know we already have the squatters regularization
program.
Yeah, but aside from that, if you're saying that people didn't go and get the necessary approvals to build houses or to get that pipe, because when you go to Tongan country, you have to get WASA approvals and everything before you go in. So if I have a whole community that exists without, say, 300, 400 people, without that pipe-borne water supply, does it mean that they didn't apply for Tongan country at all, or is it that we have a systemic problem that we need to fix?
We do have a systemic problem, and it is always a balancing exercise when you introduce new utilities or utility services to some of these communities. A number of these communities, Rockers, they've been existing for 30, 40, 50 years, and they're still going through the process. And we don't do it in isolation. You talk to your team members at the Land Settlement Agency, and you get a sense as to whether or not they are putting systems in place to regularize those communities. And in that context, you introduce the utility services. In many instances, we have turned down, especially if it is a community that's been constructed very close to a very sensitive area, and having spoken to the team at the EMA and at the Land Settlement Agency, and they told you that they're not planning to regularize these quarters because of the sensitive nature. So you take all of that into consideration before you introduce the utility services. So I hear you, but it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when you have 300-400 people living in a community, and sometimes it takes too long to regularize some of these communities, and they are without water. And from a humanitarian perspective, you have to introduce the service. You have young people, you have mothers, you have children, and you don't want to deprive them of water and electricity. And so you take all of these things into consideration.
I think it's important for you to say that part, because I know people would be wondering in terms of, so why we just regularize or encouraging people to do the wrong thing. And I'm glad that you were able to separate and say, well, no, if we take it into consideration with the other agencies, then we know the right thing from. I just making sure we get the points across so everybody understand and we're on the same page.
It's very, very important.
When one of the things that stood out to me during your tenure as Minister of Public Utilities was the upgrades at Wausau.
Oh yeah.
In terms of managing the personnel and the personalities involved in having to upskill, upgrade, and change some of that infrastructure, how difficult was that?
It was very difficult because it was somewhat like a new mindset.
Right.
So some of the team members at WASA, maintenance was something that was low down on the totem pole within the organization. You had in the past large investments in infrastructure development, infrastructure upgrades, and what have you, and very short, after 2 or 3 years, the brand new infrastructure is in a state of disrepair because you never had a proper maintenance system in place to support government's investment. And that is the reason why during the transformation, we put a lot of emphasis on retraining the workers and putting in place a maintenance policy to ensure that the investment that we are making in the upgrade of the infrastructure, it is maintained for a very, very long time. So the work that you would have seen over the last 4 years in upgrading the infrastructure, booster stations, water treatment plants, and what have you, all of that was taking place when the transformation was also taking place. So now that you have new leadership within the organization, new CEO, water distribution managers, the middle managers, and they are continuing going down the line, because we recognize that at the end of the day, what you need is strategic leadership of that organization. So the infrastructure upgrade, the new plants, the new investments that we've been making in drilling new wells to improve water production and what have you, all of that were taking place whilst we look at the transformation of the organization to ensure that the millions of dollars that we are spending, that the government is investing in state money to upgrade water infrastructure, it is happening at a time where you have a new ethos in terms of management and changing the culture within the organization so that the country can experience the benefit for 20 or 30 years from now. So it is an ongoing process. Transformation is not something that you stop. You have to continue to engage in upskilling people, in training them, training new managers, investing in new technology, and all of these things are happening at the same time while we continue to upgrade the infrastructure within the organization.
All right. Now, Minister, I know that you've been recently given a new portfolio, and I want to jump across to that before we run out of time this morning, right?
Sure.
Firstly, I want to get your comments. Yesterday would have been the last day of the SOE.
State of emergency.
Very quietly ended. No big fanfare, of course, no big announcement as was in the beginning. Any comments on the ending of the SOE? And now that we look back and see, was it successful, was it not?
Yeah, I would say it was successful because the reality is, the facts are that you had a reduction. We had a reduction in murders by about 30% and other serious crimes by 30%, confiscated over 200 firearms, large assortments of ammunition, large amounts of drugs, marijuana, and cocaine. You would have seen the incarceration of a number of gang operatives, 50 of them via detention orders by the Minister of National Security. And before the SOE ended, advised that over 15 of them, gang operators, they are now facing serious criminal charges. So all of that would have resulted in a reduction in murders and other serious crimes by 30%. Of course, we wish that it could have been by 50 or 60%. But remember, this was a state of emergency that was called in order to allow the police and law enforcement agencies to engage in more robust operation, but there was no curfew. People were able to move around as they wish. And as long as you continue to allow people to move around as they wish, you will always be challenged, because criminal activities are perpetuated by the ability of people to move around freely. The number of police operations would have resulted in what I would have just mentioned, a reduction in crime and serious crimes, murders and serious crimes by 30%. And moving forward, we intend to continue that robust police operations as we have had over the last 3 months, so that we can ensure that there is a continuous reduction in criminal gang activities, murders, and serious crimes within the next 3 months. You would have also heard that the government has taken a decision to extend the call out of the reserve army.
I was just about to mention that.
And that is until June, and that is to allow the police to continue their operations, to support law enforcement efforts on the ground, so that they can maintain their presence in the communities and on the streets, and to give that sense of safety and security throughout the country. So that's the intention. The police don't intend, and the other arms of law enforcement will continue to support the police, but they will continue their drive and the operations across the board, so that we can suppress criminal activities and make it very difficult for the criminals to perpetuate their activities across the country.
I have to ask, in terms of switching from Ministry of Public Utilities to National Security, I mean, I imagine there's a very, very steep learning curve that would have to take place in terms of a whole bunch of classified information you probably didn't have before that you now have access to, and a whole new mandate, essentially. Tell me, in terms of trying to play catch up, I guess, if you will, because the crime rate is what it is.
That's right.
Yes, we just finished the SOE, and you would have marked those successes, of course, which we all wish could have been better.
Yeah.
The nation's still crying out, we have too much crime, we have too much crime.
Yes.
And taking up this portfolio, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that you face coming in?
Because shortly after taking up the portfolio, the general election was announced. So the time that you would have taken to go into the various agencies, meet the various heads of national security, the TTPS, the Trinidad Tobago Defense Force, the Trinidad Tobago Fire Services, immigration, and all of these key agencies, the intelligence agencies. So your time is constrained because you're distracted by the election campaign. So I am looking forward actually to the end of the general elections, and I know that my party is going to be very successful, so that I can devote more time and more energy in going into the various arms of national security, understanding their challenges, understanding their concerns, especially the prisons.
Yeah.
We have had a number of successful operations here. I didn't talk about it, but hopefully on another occasion we can talk about it. But one of our crime-fighting strategy and focus will be illegal activities that are perpetuated within the walls of our prisons.
Okay.
All right? And that is a key thing that we are looking to do as soon as we win the general election, because a number of murders and a number of hits are called within the prisons, and we have to make it very difficult for criminals who are incarcerated to be able to operate their criminal activities from within the walls of the prisons. But within the state of emergency, they've had a number of successful operations, confiscated drugs, even guns, as you would have seen, and other contraband items. And we have given the assurance to the Trinidad Tobago Prison Service that we will join their efforts, and we will give them the resources so that our prisons is not a place where criminals can continue their criminal activities.
I applaud that effort, Minister. I have to wonder, though, in terms of sourcing where the challenge is, in terms of these criminals, they don't walk in the prison with cell phones. They don't get access just like that.
The challenge is corruption. Let's be very brutally honest.
I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
It is corruption. I mean, you cannot have people just going into our prisons with a gun, with marijuana, with cocaine, with knives and what have you, with all the support of errant prison officers.
Right.
And that is where the tackle is. Just last week, a prison officer was arrested for going into the prison with large amount of drugs strapped to his body. What is he going to do with that? That was to give some of the prisoners who were incarcerated to...
Give or sell?
Maybe give or to sell, perhaps to sell.
Okay.
You understand? So that is a very serious issue that we are facing in our prisons and law enforcement. When you're fighting crime not only on the streets, but you're also fighting some of our errant officers who are bent on being very corrupt and undermining law enforcement efforts. Thankfully, they are in the minority, but that is the reality, Rockers.
Yeah.
So when we talk about having vetted units within or the arms of national security, that's what we are talking about. And that's the reason why in the US and the UK and some of these countries, they insist on having vetted units because they are also fighting corruption within. These organizations.
Speaking of fighting, I mean, we're also fighting without, right? So we also fighting on the borders as well. What is some of the challenges that you see in terms of securing the borders of Trinidad and Tobago? Because we still have those challenges facing
we do,
us.
and over the last 2 or 3 months, we have made significant improvements in ensuring that some of our patrol vessels been brought back into full operation. So currently we have a number of them coming back into operation. A number of them, just a couple of weeks ago, the cabinet approved a decision to send 2 of our Cape-class vessels to Suriname for undergoing dry docking and repair services. We expect some of these vessels to be back into the waters within the next 2 to 3 months, so that our Coast Guard is equipped with the necessary resources. And at this point in time, we are also talking to the U.S. Exim Bank to get some smaller, fast vessels to augment what the Coast Guard currently has, to bolster their fleet so that our borders can be patrolled on a 24/7 basis. A number of the vessels that we have, they are big vessels, and they cannot focus on some of the smaller areas because of the size of the vessels. And the discussions that we are having with the U.S. authorities and the U.S. Exim Bank is to get those smaller, fast vessels so that the Coast Guard can focus on some of those porous areas where it can be challenged as a result of the bigger vessels.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing those upgrades and updates, because I think definitely people have that concern when it comes to securing our borders. People have that concern when it comes to, people always say, and you always hear, like when we went out on the street and people talk about how the migrants are coming and people are coming illegally, we can't regularize them properly. Yes. People talk about the guns and the drugs coming in. So I think they definitely, and we always hear that Trinidad and Tobago is a transshipment point, right?
Yes.
Even most recently, Prime Minister Young would have mentioned that when he was speaking to the U.S. representatives, that he would have mentioned the importance of Trinidad and Tobago being on their side to help with security in that aspect of things.
And I also began consultation with the U.S. authorities, and we have pointed and we have seen some successful drug interdiction on our maritime borders, and that occurred as a result of collaboration between the U.S. authorities and our local law enforcement agencies and Coast Guard. And these operations, you would have seen, resulted in a large confiscation of cocaine and marijuana on the streets, valuing over hundreds of millions of dollars. Close collaboration, intelligence-led operation. And as a result of that, they have decided to continue to collaborate with government so that our Coast Guard can be given the requisite resources so that they can ramp up activities in patrolling and securing our borders. And that's the reason why I'm saying that moving forward, we put a lot of emphasis on or demands rather, on our law enforcement agencies and those agencies that are responsible for our national security. But they cannot do what they can do. They cannot discharge their responsibilities if they are not provided with the appropriate resources.
Yeah.
The fire services must be given the necessary resources. The Coast Guard must be provided with the necessary resources. The police must be given the necessary resources. And when you give them the necessary resources, you expect management to hold them to account.
Because this is the thing I was going to get into. We talk about giving them resources, but every year when we have the budget read out, national security gets a big piece of the pie, and a big in terms of resources when it comes to the financial allocation, right?
Yes.
And we hear about we're going to get a new fleet of vehicles, we hear about these things, but then we also see some of those vehicles parked up after a while. The same thing we talk about just now with Rasta, right? When it talks to maintenance, when it talks to accountability and responsibility. So how do we fix that challenge?
That is the problem. You have to fix management. Management, because giving the resources is one thing, or depriving an organization of resources can result in serious implications. In this case, we are talking about national security. But providing the police, for example, and the defense force with new, modern vehicles, it looks good, feels good, it's amazing. It gives that sense of security. But do we have the necessary system in place to ensure that those vehicles are properly maintained. And one of my focus will be on proper fleet management within the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and within the Ministry of National Security, because I do not believe or subscribe to the philosophy that you just spend large amounts of money on providing these types of resources and you are not putting system in place to ensure that they are protected.
Is it that they will need additional funds to be able to do the maintenance, or is part of the budget supposed to be maintenance?
We have to look at it. I know the government has mandated VEMGOT, the Vehicle Management Company of Trinidad and Tobago, to be the official fleet manager or fleet management service provider for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. We have to determine whether or not VEMGOT has the capacity to maintain that large fleet of vehicles and whether VEMGOT is being paid on time so that they can continue to provide efficient fleet management services to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. So all of these things have to be looked at, and we have to look at it in a serious way. And wherever we require transformation, wherever we require pouring of resources to ensure that these investments are protected, we have to do it, and we have to do it quickly. Because at the end of the day, if you don't do it, it is the citizens that feel the impact by not seeing the presence of police officers in their communities, or it hinders the ability of the police to respond to reports of serious crimes in the community. So you have to look at these things in a very serious way.
So one of the things that we just got news about would have been the e-bikes in Tobago, right? Which is, I guess we could call it a brand new fleet of vehicles, because
it's a brand new fleet of vehicle because it gives the police the ability to be able to patrol.
So in terms of that, like, I mean, I don't know the capacity of VEMCOT to be able to include e-bikes in their list of things. It feels like is now we entered into a phase where there's a whole new type of vehicle that we have to cater for, the electric vehicles.
I was not about to say, even for electronic vehicles, we have a lot of electronic vehicles being introduced in Trinidad and Tobago. And when you talk to people, they're telling you that we are still building our capacity to maintain these types of vehicles, to ensure that professionals are equipped with the skills to maintain those vehicles. So it's an ongoing process to ensure it sounds good, it looks good. You encourage people to go into that direction, but ensuring that you have the appropriate and the requisite skill sets within these agencies so that they can provide the necessary maintenance services to vehicle fleet of this nature is something that you have to look at. So yes, you're absolutely right.
When I know you haven't gotten a chance to go around to each agency as yet, but I'm sure you would have been able to chat with some of the people and gotten some kind of feedback when it comes to the ratio between I don't want to say old, but the aging officers, the people who've been working, doing the job, and everybody gets that promotion, you come up through the ranks as the case may be. In terms of refilling that, do we have enough human resources? Do we have enough people in the defensive services, in the national security services, to be able to say, well, we can do the job ahead, or do we need to expand the recruitment drive?
I remember a couple of years ago, the government has taken a decision to recruit more police officers to augment the current strength.
But it didn't happen. They tried and it didn't get more.
It is happening. Just a couple of weeks ago, a new batch within that policy that was made by government. I attended the passing out parade of a new batch of police officers, and I was advised that they are a batch of police officers that came out of government's plan to increase the number of police officers that are available for active duty. And very soon, maybe 2 or 3 months from now, I'm told that a batch is in training and they will also be ready for graduation.
That's municipal police or
TTPS? TTPS police officers. So it is happening. It's an ongoing process. So every 2 or 3 months, you have the passing out parade and graduation of new police officers, and that came out of government's decision 2 years ago to expand, I can't remember the exact amount, but to expand the number of police officers that are available to active duty and for active duties.
Okay, and in terms of making sure that these people who are passing out as police are able to, same thing we talk about just now when it comes to the levels of corruption that people can enter into, how do we make sure that these people coming in aren't prone to that, or that they aren't, even thinking about it?
Well, it's a very robust recruitment process, and because of that robust recruitment process, you find a number of potential candidates, they don't get through eventually. part of the requirement is a polygraph test, robust background checks, and what have you. And it is posing a challenge because you are trying to get the best out there, and you're trying to ensure that those persons and young persons who come forward to offer themselves for national duty in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, you have the best that is available. And I can tell you the recruitment process, at the end of it, a lot of people don't make the end.
And that's the part that has me concerned, is that if a bunch of people want to do it, but they can't really get through because they've already failed certain aspects of it, then we have a different problem. We have to sort out as a society on the whole.
And I remember last year in Parliament, while I was serving as Minister of Public Utilities, I spoke in a debate. I can't remember the name of the bill. It was eventually passed to allow for the management of the police service to subject police officers for continuous vetting and polygraph testing.
Yes.
And that was a very critical piece of legislation because it was all in a quest to ensure that we have police officers, especially those who are involved in sensitive investigation, involving serious crimes, that we have the best officers so that they can exchange intelligence information not only among their colleagues here in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the region and their international counterparts. Because there are a number of agencies, law enforcement agencies around the world, will not speak to you and will not speak to their local counterparts if they are not properly vetted.
Which makes sense. Which makes sense because it's sensitive information you're dealing with. But Minister, we are out of time, unfortunately. But I do want to thank you very much for taking the time this morning to come and join us on the Now Morning Show and to share these updates both on your former ministry and your current ministry. And I want to wish you all the best with the Ministry of National Security. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, Minister of National Security, checking in with us inside your spotlight on Now. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you for having me, man.
Not a problem.
I should be back after the elections.
Have a great day, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we take that break and come back with more. Stay tuned.